Hello, gardeners, and welcome to another edition of Your Gardening Week. And what a crazy gardening week ahead we have. I'll be talking a lot more about that. It's great to see you here on a Monday. This is the spot to come and get your gardening questions answered and join the gardening community from all over the world as we share our ideas, our problems, and just the opportunity to be gardeners together. Got a lot of information to share with you today. It's great to see everybody checking in, and I'm glad to have this time to spend with you. I've already noticed some great questions popping up. I'm going to cover 3 of them right away as people are checking in and as you all give your greetings to each other. The first one comes from Stephen Luna. He was asking about biochar, and I have a couple videos about biochar in my library. Specifically, the question was about inoculating and then the biochar drying out and if it's still inoculating. So if you don't know much about biochar, I suggest you look up my biochar video and how to use it in the garden, and that'll help give you some background. Before you use biochar, and it's a type of carbon, very similar to charcoal. Before you use it in the garden, it needs to be inoculated. It needs to be charged with beneficial bacteria so that when you put it in your soil, right away it's acting to improve your soil with that bacterial growth. Well, when you let it dry, the bacteria will die because, like living animals, they're going to need water to continue living. But many bacteria will go dormant. So it depends on how long your biochar is dry before you reuse it. In some cases, you can just wet the biochar. So if you have previously activated your biochar and then it's dried out, I would soak it in a bucket of water for a couple hours just so the pores are filled with moisture before you put them in your soil. You're not going to have as high bacterial action as with freshly charged biochar, but you can expect that some of that bacteria will reemerge and will begin populating the soil once you use it. So freshly charged, freshly inoculated biochar is best to use, but you can use dried biochar. Probably won't get the results as quickly, but it won't be as bad. So go ahead and continue using it. If you can recharge it, when you soak it in that bucket of water, pour in some compost at the same time, and that'll help add to that inoculation. And then we had PD asking about Comfrey. I've got a video about using Comfrey tea, and the question was whether I have a preferred variety of Comfrey. Now, the Comfrey I'm using is just a generic variety, so I really don't know what cultivar it might be. But if you're looking to buy Comfrey to put in your garden, the one I recommend is Bocking 14. It's a sterile variety because in many areas, Comfrey can become invasive once it sets seed, and it can be very difficult to get rid of at that point. I don't have that problem. I can keep my Comfrey under control in my region, so it really doesn't matter. But if you might have that potential, I suggest Bocking 14. The seeds will not sprout when they spread. I'm not even sure if it sets seed, but it's a sterile variety that you can keep under control. So look for that. And often when you go to a site, most nurseries don't sell Comfrey or Comfrey seed, but if you find it online, more than likely it's going to be Bocking 14 as one of your options. And then Shoutout, and I hope that's okay to just stop there because I know I have no way to pronounce your name correctly, but was asking about acidic soil and making the soil so it's not as acidic, raising the pH. But if you live in an area with extreme pH, soil pH, you have options to try to correct the pH towards neutral. So if you have a very acidic soil, you would typically add lime to raise the pH. Or if you have a very alkaline soil, you would typically add sulfur to lower the pH. And there's a few other things you could use like wood ashes to raise the soil pH, but not all of us have those options. And in using those options, they're very limited as to how much you can raise the soil pH and whether it's even worth the option. And so the question was, what can be done besides choosing, in this case, acid-loving plants? So here's what I've done in this situation. I have alkaline soil, and I want to grow blueberries. And blueberries require a very low pH. They require an acidic soil. So rather than trying to change all of my soil to try to grow some of the plants that need a different pH, instead what I do is I'll put pots or containers or a smaller bed. I'll do everything I can to change the pH within that bed to grow the kind of plants that require a different type of pH. And then I just accept that in my garden at large, I just cannot grow certain plants. So in my Zone 5 Colorado garden, alkaline soil, I just know that I can't have a big blueberry patch. Azaleas, there's lots of plants that like lower pHs that I just can't grow, and I accept that. But if I want some of those plants, I can improve the pH in smaller areas with better results. So a direct answer to your question, you may not be able to do much to change your soil pH to grow a lot of different types of plants other than the acid-loving ones. But you can try to amend the soil in small zones, and you might be able to get a little extra variety into your garden. Pat Patrick, thank you so much for that super chat. That's a great way to start today. I thank you so much for that. This is going to be a crazy week. And so for those of you around the world, you probably haven't heard. There's no reason you would. But here in the United States, the western half of our country has been under extreme heat. In fact, in California, heat records were destroyed yesterday. There were some regions of the state that reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit. That's almost 49 degrees Celsius. Those are temperatures that have never been reached in inland California. In my region yesterday, we set not only a high temperature reading that was 5 degrees Fahrenheit above the previous reading, but yesterday was the hottest day of the entire year. So it's hot, and I know a lot of you are experiencing this same heat. But what makes this week so crazy is that the high pressure ridge has moved out of the way, and now an Arctic front is barreling down from Canada. And so for me, starting tonight, the temperatures are dropping to freezing, and over the next 3 days will be below freezing. So for instance, I just looked this up. Tomorrow night, the temperature is supposed to be 23 degrees. That's minus 5 degrees Celsius. If you saw my video last night, I talked about this storm coming through. So the forecast has improved. It increased from 19 degrees to 23 degrees. But still, 23 degrees is just crazy cold. So to go from 97 to 23 in just over a day and a half is just unprecedented. So I'll be talking a lot more about that here in just a little bit. I know a lot of you saw my video last night. I know a lot of you are suffering with the same problems. And I know a lot of you have the opposite kind of problems right now living in different parts of the world. So we'll get to that here in just a little bit. So let's see who we've got checking in. A lot of the normal people. Hello, Matthew in Utah. You're prepping for the storm yourself. Yep, this whole region's going to be impacted. Gladys from West Virginia. First year planting for the fall. Excited about cabbage and broccoli. They're thriving. I'm so glad to hear that. Fred is asking, can I keep my compost going in the winter here in Alaska? That's a good question. And so this gets to basic composting philosophy. I am a lazy composter. And actually, I'm going to have a video about that here in the next few months. I have a relatively cool compost pile. I add to it when I get material. I turn it every now and then. It takes a long time to break down. Because that's the way I compost, in winter my pile freezes, and then I just let it be frozen. I'll still add to it. And then in the spring, when everything starts to thaw, I have a lot more moisture. Then I actively turn my pile. A lot of the material is mostly decomposed, and then I have that compost ready to use in my spring garden. That's how I do it. Now, if you want to take a very active approach to composting, even in Alaska, you can keep your compost going all year round. And I do have a video about understanding compost where I talk much more about the different types of bacteria that are involved in the decomposition process. And the thermophilic bacteria operate at extremely high temperatures. And so what you need to do to have your pile going throughout the winter is to be actively involved with it. And that means ensuring that it's consistently moist and turning it regularly so that you're introducing the oxygen and that you have a really good ratio between the carbon and the nitrogen material. And when you do that, all the different bacteria will begin breaking down your organic material. And then when those thermophilic bacteria kick in, they will maintain the pile at 140 degrees Fahrenheit very easily. And at those temperatures, if you cover your pile like with a tarp, you'll be able to keep the compost and the bacteria action going all winter long. It takes activity. And so for me, in my winters, they're so harsh, I don't like going outside when it's single-digit temperatures and blowing snow, so that's why I just let my compost pile go in the winter. But certainly, even in Alaska, you can keep compost going if you want to play that role to keep the bacteria happy. Okay, Myra, good to see you. Good morning to you in Southern California. Kathleen is in Washington. Simplified Gardening, good to see you today. Thanks so much for joining us. And so, for those of you that have not checked out the Simplified Gardening channel, I strongly encourage that you do so. We have very similar gardening philosophies. This is one of those type of things where you have a gardener in the UK and a gardener like me in the US, and we're practicing very similar gardening methods to the point that we're actually going to team up on a video here pretty soon. So I'll just give you that little teaser. But check out the Simplify Gardening channel, and thank you so much for giving that soil answer already this morning. Well, it's actually afternoon getting into evening for you. So good to see you here this morning. Simplify Gardening channel. I strongly recommend it. I encourage that you check it out. He has more videos than I do, but we're really comparable with how we approach gardening. And I think that's really a nice way for all of us as gardeners to find gardeners not only in your region, but around the world that you can actually communicate with and share some of your thoughts, share what you're doing, share ideas, share suggestions, because that really helps make our global gardening community so much stronger and so much better. So thank you. So good to see you here today. Amy is asking, Gardener Scott, can we plant seeds after this storm? Peas or carrots, maybe with a cover plant? Yes, absolutely. And I have a recent series of videos on fall gardens. Now this storm coming through, this really is unprecedented. If you look back historically at weather in this part of the United States, it's been more than 60 years since we've had cold weather like this early in the season. And what is so typical for me in Colorado and so many others is we'll get one day like this where we have cold and then everything gets back almost to normal. And so for those of us that are going to have problems with our plants in the next couple days, Next week, the temperatures are going to rise above freezing, and we can probably expect them to remain above freezing until we get to our average first frost date. So yes, there should be plenty of time for those of us that are losing our plants or can expect at least some damage to our plants in the next couple days. Start some new seeds. Put in some of these plants for a fall garden that can grow pretty quickly. You'll easily be able to grow spinach and lettuce and radishes in no time, and they'll be able to harvest before your expected first freeze would normally come. And with protection, you can easily grow carrots and beets and turnips and a lot of those other plants. Now, carrots are kind of on the edge right now because a lot of carrots take months before they'll reach the size that most of us would want before we harvest. So yes, you can start them in the next week. You would almost assuredly need extra protection to keep the carrots growing a little bit closer into the winter months. But don't be disheartened. If you're in the United States, if you're in Canada, and this Arctic front has devastated your garden, you don't have to give up. I've got more videos coming where I'll talk about the different types of protections, how to build them, how I'm going to be using them in my garden. But don't give up. You can definitely have enough time left in the season to continue growing. Because as I've pointed out in some of the videos that I already have in my library, you can continue growing past your first frost date in fall with protection. Well, we haven't even reached our average first frost date in most areas, so it's not too late. Definitely go for it. Okay, Riverdale Gardens is saying, Gardener Scott, my granddaughter River, I'm Dale, hi Dale and River, is a bit upset and worried about you. I assured her you'll be fine. We'll have plenty of plants remaining and plenty more to come. Thank you so much. And you can tell River that I'm going to be okay. I'm going to lose a lot of plants. That's just going to happen. But I'm going to take action to try to save as much as I can. I'm bringing plants inside. But as I just said, I'm not giving up. I'm going to start over again with some new seeds, with some new plants. I have a pretty big garden, and so in some respects, this is a little bit of a blessing because I'll be able to go ahead and start preparing some of these beds earlier than I might normally do it. I normally don't start preparing my beds for winter until maybe October or early November, and a lot of that is weather dependent. Well, this gives me the opportunity now to actually prepare some of my beds for next spring a little bit early, so that next spring, that's less work to do because I'm doing it right now. So I always try to find the silver lining, try to see some things that I can do to take advantage of a terrible event like this. I'm not going to plant out my entire garden like I would in spring. I'll just plant a few of my beds so I can keep growing as long as possible. But thank you for your concern, Dale. Let River know that I'm going to be fine, and you'll see how I bounce back from this in the videos that are coming up. Because it's not just me. There's a lot of us that are going to see our whole summer's work gone. And it's sad. It really is sad for all of us. I encourage that you don't get depressed about it. Instead, try to look at it as I do, as just another one of those stories that we get to tell years from now. If you've been listening to my live streams for months now, a couple times I've talked about the 1 year that I had 3 hailstorms in about a 3-week period. And after each one, the garden was devastated, and I replanted and reseeded. And then the next storm came, and I replanted and I reseeded. And even after the 3rd storm, I replanted and reseeded and was able to get a harvest that year. I love sharing that story because that's the worst year that I've had as far as hail is concerned. And that happened about 15 years ago. So it just goes to show these major terrible events happen, and then they may never happen again. But when you're sitting around with your gardening friends, everybody can share their worst year. And this may end up being the worst end to a garden season that I've had. So Dribian is saying, Gardener Scott, do you recommend inoculating beans and peas? And should I continue to inoculate if I plan on using the same bed for beans, peas in future seasons? Good question. So the reason this is a good question, because I can share the ideas with a lot of you I know who are new gardeners. So peas and beans are legumes. That's pretty common knowledge. And what makes legumes special is that they have a synergistic relationship with some soil bacteria, and there will be nitrogen nodules on the roots of legumes. And it's actually the bacteria working with the plant, and it takes the nitrogen from the air and then makes it into a type of nitrogen that the plants can use, and these little nodules on the roots are where the nitrogen is stored. Well, if you don't have that type of bacteria in your soil, you can grow beans and peas. Eventually, the bacteria will probably find their way in, and you'll start getting the benefits of that nitrogen buildup on the roots. But first time with new soil without those bacteria, you're not going to have that same effect. Most of the time, we don't even notice it. The plants are going to be fine. We're going to harvest our peas and beans, and they'll be great. But especially if you want to use those plants to try to fix nitrogen in the soil, it's a whole nother issue that I've talked about before. You need that type of bacteria. So when you buy your bean and pea seed, particularly from online nurseries, you might be able to find it in your local nursery, but they'll sell the inoculant, the bacteria that you can work into your soil, and therefore it's already in place. And as soon as you start growing your peas and beans, the bacteria starts taking the nitrogen from the air, affixing it to those nodules, and that symbiotic relationship is at play. Once you've done it, you really shouldn't need to do it again, because that bacteria is now in your soil. So as long as you grow the same types of plants, you shouldn't need additional inoculant. Now, if you add a new bed and you fill it with new soil, that new soil is not going to have that bacteria. So what I've done in the past, and it seems to have worked fine, is to take some of the soil from the bed that I know was inoculated and use some of that to fill in the new bed. And that way I don't have to buy inoculant again. Inoculant isn't terribly expensive, but it's often more than I would like to spend if I can find a way around it, like just mixing my soils where I know that bacteria already exists. So if it doesn't matter much to you, just let the bacteria naturally find their way to your bed. It can take a long period of time. Or get the inoculant, start it right away, but use that soil now as an inoculant for future beds that you might be growing legumes in. So thank you. That's a good question. D.D. O'Brien is saying, I hope the forecast is not as accurate as planned and your pumpkins make it through. Thank you so much. I'm actually planning on harvesting all my pumpkins today because the cold is coming tomorrow. They're mostly mature, and so there will be a few that might not be, but I'm okay with that. The forecast is looking bad. 23 degrees from the Weather Channel, and our local news is now calling for the temperature to drop to 28 degrees, which is actually lower than what they've been saying for a while. 28 is about minus 2.5 Celsius. And so over the last few days, those different forecasts are beginning to get closer together. And so I'm expecting probably about minus 24 or minus 25 in my area officially. And I actually live almost 1,000 feet higher than Colorado Springs, which is the main town. And about 1,000 feet of elevation, you drop about 3 degrees Fahrenheit, just over 1 degree Celsius. And so what that means for me is even though our official forecast is in that mid-20s range, I'm expecting that my temperature is going to be lower just because I'm at a higher elevation. So I appreciate your concern, but I'm just going to be harvesting as much as I possibly can. Myra is saying, shout out to kids who like to garden. Matthew, a 4-year-old, is giving family and friends garden tours and showing them how to know when tomatoes are ready to eat. That's awesome. Shout out to Matthew for that. I actually was planning that video on how to tell when tomatoes are ready to eat, but I'm not going to get the tomatoes to that point. So thank you so much to Matthew, because you're doing what I can't be doing this year. I'm very, very impressed. Thank you for sharing that, Myra. That's so wonderful. Okay, Mrs. Marvel is saying, this is the first year I've inoculated and I have new beds with new soil. I've actually noticed a difference in those new beds. That's great. And that's why you would use the inoculant. So thank you for sharing that as well. Simplified gardening. Tony is saying cover crops now will help bring the bacteria and nitrogen in. Something like hairy vetch is brilliant for bringing them in. Absolutely. In fact, each week I try to, or the last couple weeks, and from here on out, I'm sharing the new observation, something in the garden that I haven't seen or haven't seen in a while. And I grow hairy vetch. Again, I told you, Simplified Gardening channel, and Tony and I do a lot of things similar. I love hairy vetch, and I've already started hairy vetch in some of my beds much earlier this year so that they would set seed, and then I can take that vetch seed and spread it throughout my garden as a cover crop. It also does what the other legumes that we were talking about do, and it will set the nitrogen on the root nodules. It was so cool yesterday. I was filming the video that's going to be coming out on Wednesday, and I kept hearing this popping noise because I was sitting right next to the vetch. Well, the hairy vetch, when it sets seed, the seeds are in pods. And this doesn't happen with all pods, but it obviously happens with hairy vetch. And so when the seeds in the pods are fully mature, and especially on a day like yesterday where we were setting record high temperatures, the pods were exploding and sending out the vetch seed all over that bed and the pathways just outside that bed. So totally agree with Tony. Hairy vetch is a great cover crop, but try growing some early in the season and then let it go to seed. And that sound of the popping pods is really incredible. It's one of those gardening experiences that I always encourage all of you to try to find and then add to your repertoire of gardening stories. Well, now I can talk about sitting next to hairy vetch plants and having the seed pods explode all around me. So that was really cool. I do have a video about green manures, cover crops, and I'll probably be doing another one this year as well. It's a great suggestion to cover the ground, and one of the ways to do that is with a plant like hairy vetch that will be a nitrogen accumulator. Sharon C., thank you so much for that contribution. I appreciate it. It's always nice to see that gratitude. Thanks so much. Okay, yeah, thanks, Tony, with a smiley face. I appreciate that. Doris is doing radishes as a cover crop in Michigan. That's an interesting option as well. So when I had my video from this last week where I talked about weeds and how they can be beneficial in the garden, one of the benefits of some of the weeds that you might have around your garden is that they can send down the roots, and the roots can help break apart compacted soil, dense soil. Radishes are actually an interesting cover crop that completely approved. Great idea. That not only will cover the ground and help protect it going into fall and winter, but especially if you have a deep-rooted, like a daikon type of radish, it's breaking apart the soil. So now in the spring, when you go to work those beds where you've used radishes as cover crops, the radishes have basically loosened up the soil for you, which makes your work even that much less in the spring. So great idea. I really like the idea of using radishes as a cover crop. Amy is saying, Gardner Scott, I have clay soil. Descriptions say hairy vetch doesn't like clay soil. Any other favorites, or should I stick to clover? Clover is another great option. You might be able to get away with some winter rye. There's also some like Austrian peas. There's a lot of cover crops out there that you can use aside from hairy vetch. Hairy vetch does great in my area. That's why I like to use it. But yeah, don't feel like because I like hairy vetch, that's your primary goal is to also plant hairy vetch. Start looking into other cover crops that might be suitable for your soil in your area. As always, I always suggest this every week. Try to talk to other gardeners in your area, the experienced gardeners who do things like planting cover crops, and see what they do. And that'll probably be the best answer to match with your soil in particular. So thanks so much. Lauraful says, we use groundhogs to break up the soil. That's good. Yes, they can be very effective. And yes, Diane, it is called hairy vetch, exactly like you spelled it. And I want to thank you, Lauraful. I saw that you were very active last night, answering a lot of questions on my video. The video that came out last night was talking about this storm coming through and some of the things that you can do to protect your plants and ready yourself for when you know that your gardening season is over. There was a lot of stuff that I couldn't cover or chose not to cover in that video just because I didn't want it to be overly long. I really just wanted to try to cover some of the high points so that when you have a dramatic change in temperature overnight, what you can do to help protect your plants and get ready for that cold. And one of the things that Lauraful was suggesting, and I completely agree with, is adding water to your protection plan. And so what I mean by this, first off, is watering the ground. So if you know that really severe weather is coming, it's common, and I used to do this. You think, well, the plants are going to die, or they're going to suffer. Snow's coming. I'm not going to water today. Well, you should water today. The soil, the wet soil, the moist soil will retain more heat than dry soil. And so definitely water the day before this cold weather is coming. And then plan to cover your plants. And as I talk about in the video, depending on what kind of cover you have will determine how much extra protection you have. And so the idea is basically that your warm soil is radiating heat. And if you can trap that heat around your plants, then you can give them a little bit extra protection, extra temperature protection. And so a moist soil will have more heat, and when it's trapped, it will help retain some of that warm air temperature longer. Another way to help retain some of that warm temperature is to put in jugs of water. Just fill a liter bottle, a gallon jug, and put it next to your plants. And then when you cover your plants, that initial radiant heat from the soil will warm the air. But that only lasts for a period of time through the night before that air around the plants will begin to cool because of the extreme cold outside that protection. And so that's why a plastic cover might only gain you 3 or 4 degrees Fahrenheit protection, only 1 or 2 degrees Celsius, because eventually that air is going to cool because of the cold influence outside that cover. But if you've got water jugs or some other container that's holding water, well, that water is going to retain the heat longer, and it's going to help the air temperature around the plants stay warmer longer. So if you want to gain a couple extra degrees, consider putting water underneath your cover. And this is very effective. At the Galileo Garden Greenhouse, we did the exact same principle to protect our plants. But instead of using jugs of water, we had a 1,500-gallon tank of water. And it was very effective at keeping the greenhouse warm. always 20 to 25 degrees. It was an unheated greenhouse. And so there were days when the temperature got down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's see, that's minus 18 degrees Celsius. And the temperature inside an unheated greenhouse with that water as the primary source to keep the air warm was usually about 25 degrees Fahrenheit, which put it at about minus 4 degrees Celsius. So water can play a huge difference in protecting your plants. Now, one of the reasons I didn't include it in the video last night is because I didn't want to convey a false sense that if you cover your plants and put water in, that it will protect your plants. The weather that's coming into my region is so severe, even with the water, even with the plastic, at minus 23 degrees Fahrenheit, it's not going to be enough protection. But if you're at 40 degrees Fahrenheit, or if you're at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, basically, if you're in that range of like 0 to 5 degrees Celsius and you're concerned about these cold temperatures, by covering your plants with plastic and having that warm soil and putting in a warm water container, you will give your plants all the protection they need to get through the cold nights. This is a weird storm. It's just going to be hit and then be gone in 3 days. But you can use these same principles as you get further into fall. Cover your plants, consider adding the water, and you'll definitely be able to extend your season by weeks. And one thing I also didn't include in the video last night is the material really makes a difference. So I talked about the difference between covering with 6 mil plastic and a tarp, but you can use space blankets. You know those silver blankets that you can buy for survival? If you cover your beds with those space blankets, you're getting a huge amount of extra protection because they are manufactured to reflect heat. So add some of that to the hoops, to the coverings over your garden plants, and some of that heat that would have been lost because the outside air is cold, you're not going to have as much loss. So you'll gain a couple extra degrees if you were to use one of those silver protective blankets instead of plastic. So there's lots of these little tricks. And I do have some of those blankets, and I'm planning to try to cover a couple of my plants in the next couple days just to see how much extra protection I can get. But the idea here is you don't have to give up. You can try all of these different methods or a portion, just 1 or 2 of them to protect your plants. Even when you are certain you're going to have damage. So I am certain my garden plants are going to be killed. But I'm still covering my tomato plants. I'm still covering my lettuces and my spinach and my kale, because it's possible that the forecasters could be wrong, that it's not going to get that cold. So I've got nothing to lose except the time it takes to put these corrective actions in place. If it hits as cold as it's going to hit, even with a space blanket, even with water, it's going to be too cold in my garden to save the plants. But if it doesn't get that cold, well, then maybe I'll be able to come out the next day and see that the plants are alive. And this gets to the next phase that I wanted to talk about that I didn't cover in the video last night. You have to look at the long-term weather forecast. So, for instance, the weather overnight tonight is supposed to drop down close to freezing. But tomorrow, or actually this is on Tuesday, my high temperature will be 33 degrees. That's 1 degree centigrade. The low will be 23. That's the update. That's minus 5 Celsius. The high on Wednesday is only going to be 37 degrees. That's 3 degrees Celsius. with a low overnight of 28. That's -2 Celsius. So what this means for me is over a period of just about 3 solid days, my warmest temperature is going to be 37 degrees. My coldest temperature is going to be 23 degrees. And remember, a lot of this protection is based on that radiant heat from the soil, warming the air, and then you're trapping that air to save your plants. But when you have cold air, followed by cold air, followed by cold air from day to night to day to night, eventually that air is going to get down to the point that the radiant warmth from the soil is not going to be enough. And that's the situation I'm in, because I've got day after day over the next few days where the soil is eventually going to lose most of its heat, and then those severely cold nights are going to set in, and that's why I'm saying I'm going to lose my whole garden. If it's only going to hit you one night and you do some of this protective stuff, you can save your garden. Even 2 nights. If the day warms up enough that it can recharge the heat in the soil, then you'll probably be able to save your plant. So I'm not trying to paint a doom and gloom picture. I'm just trying to explain to you my reasoning and what I didn't mention in the video last night that led me to believe, as I was doing my analysis, that even when I do all of this, that sun that could make all the difference on Wednesday, if it warmed up on Wednesday, I would probably have some better outcomes. But instead, it's supposed to be overcast and snowy on Wednesday, so we're not going to get the sun to recharge the heat. You might be able to. So again, you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain if you do some of these protective actions. Okay, Dimes Fishing is saying, I feel like Gardener Scott could use some new custom tailored channel music for free. If you're interested, just stay in touch. Thanks, I'll do that. I've actually been thinking about what I would be doing about some music. Last week I talked about trying to improve not only these live streams, but some of the other things I'll be doing in videos, and music is a part of that. So thank you. That's a great suggestion. I appreciate that. Laura Full is saying to get the EPA to build a dome over your greenhouse or over your garden. Win-win. Yeah, that would be awesome. I am planning, I had a few people ask about this. I am planning a greenhouse. That is in my plans. I thought maybe it might be 2 years out. After this weather year, I think I'm going to try to really focus hard next year to build the greenhouse, and a couple extra hoop houses that I'll be building as well, high hoop houses. So look for those videos. I'll definitely be documenting that whole process. You're not the first to suggest that I put a dome over the entire garden. So that's wonderful. I appreciate it. Okay, let's see what else we have popping up. Tony saying at Simplified Gardening, have to go. Working nights. Hope you all are not too badly affected with the storm. Stay safe. Again, Simplified Gardening, a channel out of the UK. Even though he lives in a different region, he does a lot of things similar to me. I encourage you to check out that channel as well. So thanks, Tony. Have a good evening. Mrs. Marvel is saying that would be great. Refresh to the brand and the channel. Yeah, thank you so much. So that's another advantage to a loss of your garden season. Now, for most of us, it's more gradual. We build our way up to accepting that the garden season is over. Most of the time, it doesn't happen overnight like it's going to happen to those of us in Colorado. But as you see your season coming to an end, and especially if it comes to an unexpected end, it frees you up. A lot of the stuff that you would be doing out in your garden, you're not doing in your garden. You got to find something else to do with your time. So that's one of the things I'm going to be doing with my extra time, is trying to amp up my videos, trying to modify the brand a little bit, be a little more, I don't want to say professional, that's not the right word, but to have a little more shine to the videos. But I'm trying to be careful because I don't want to come off as that commercial channel that's professionally produced, and then you lose sight of what I'm trying to do. I'm still just a gardener out in my garden, doing gardening things. And oh, by the way, I make some videos about it and share what I'm doing. So I still want to retain that aspect of the Gardener Scott channel. But I feel if I can make the videos a little more professional, it'll be easier for you as well. So I'm going to be practicing some of that and trying some new things as we move into the winter. So look for those. I thank you. I appreciate the support. Okay, Mrs. Marvel is actually talking to Kathleen saying, like to poke fun because my father-in-law was a forecaster for the U.S. Air Force. That was actually what I did right before I retired from the Air Force. I ran the airfield operations at the Air Force Academy here in Colorado Springs. And the weather forecasters actually worked for me. And I used to go every day and we'd have a cup of coffee over the forecast. And these were exceptional weather forecasters. They were so good that they won awards. They had a 90% success rate with their forecasts. The problem is all we remember is the times that they're wrong. So I have great respect for Air Force weather forecasters, and that's one reason why I can look at a forecast for what's coming up, because I've learned an awful lot about weather as an Air Force pilot and working with weather forecasters. And that's why I'm accepting that this is going to be a terrible storm, because I've seen all the charts and the weather rolling in. But it's nice that you had a father that was a forecaster. That's a very honorable profession. I've got great respect and admiration for weather forecasters who can do this day in and day out. And all people remember is the time they got it wrong. There are so many times that they get it right. And that's why I like to rely on the forecasters as often as I can. Dribian is saying, Gardener Scott, how do you store your container soil in the off season? Should any special care be taken? I don't do that much extra with my container soil. I've had questions, and I've covered this in the past, about whether you should exchange your soil every year, and you really don't need to. Container soil can easily last 2 or 3 years if you just add some extra compost, maybe some extra fertilizer every year. This year, what I'm going to be doing, because I've got these brand new beds that some were just filled for the first time last year, some were just filled for the first time this year, the soil still needs a lot of organic material worked into it. It still needs amending. So this year, what I'm going to do is actually take most of my container soil, which is soilless mix. It's primarily peat and compost and vermiculite and perlite and other things like that. And I'm going to dump that into my garden beds to add some organic material to the garden beds. And I'll definitely be showing you that in upcoming videos. So that's what I'm doing this year. And then next year, I will start fresh with all new soil. Now, in most years, when the garden soil has been built up and it's rich and it's fertile, what I'll do with my containers is I'll just take them into the garage or leave them next to an outside wall to get some protection. Primarily if they're in pots, just so the pots don't crack. But I don't do any prep in addition to that in the fall and the winter. They're just being stored. They're just out of the snow and the ice as much as possible. And then in the spring, I'll bring them back outside, let the soil warm, let the bacteria that is present in that container soil start growing again. And that's when I'll add more peat or more compost or more fertilizer to kind of recharge the container. So I do my recharging in the spring, but no, I don't do anything particularly special in the fall or winter other than storing them, or in this case, adding to the soil. And this actually ties into something I wanted to talk about today, because I've had some questions about this, particularly from new gardeners. I often talk about adding organic materials to your soil, or adding organic matter to your soil. And so I've been getting questions, what does that mean? And that's a good question. I've been gardening for so long that I can just say add organic matter to your soil because that's what I do. And I have a faulty assumption that all of you know what I'm talking about, but it's clear that not all of you do. So organic matter, when I say add organic matter to your soil or add organic materials, I'm talking about plant-based material that will decompose in your soil. It might be partially decomposed already. So the most common recommendation is for compost, and compost is partially decomposed organic material. So when you add compost to your soil, you are adding an organic material to your soil. You can also add aged manure. And I say aged manure because fresh manure could possibly have E. coli. It has too much of ammonia. You want an aged manure. But you can put aged manure of all types. Horse manure, cow manure, llama manure, chicken manure. You can put all of those manures into your soil. And because all of those animals were eating plants, well, then the manure is an organic amendment for your soil. So manures are organic matter. If you have peat, or if you live in a region of the world where you don't have peat, you have coir. Using peat or coir as an amendment to your soil adds organic material. Both of those decompose very slowly, so they can be very good for improving your soil structure, especially if you have clay soil. You can add those type of organics. If you have grass that is mowed from a lawn, fresh or dry, you can add that to your soil. That's an organic material. Leaves, when they fall from the trees in the fall, crush up those leaves, mix them into your soil. That's organic material. So you see the commonality here. These are all things that we have all around us. Most of them are free. And when you mix them into your soil, you're adding organic material that now the bacteria and the fungi that live in the soil will start feeding upon. And they'll break those organic materials down. And that's what releases the nutrients into the soil. That's what makes your soil rich and fertile. And fertile is all that organic material. And so when I talk about mulches, that you mulch with an organic mulch, I'm talking about straw and leaves and grass and wood chips. Again, it's those plant-based materials that will decompose and add some fertility to the soil once all those microorganisms begin to work on it. So I appreciate all of those of you who have been honest enough to express that you didn't understand what I was talking about. And so I hope that helps for everybody. Just keep adding organic material to your soil, and that's how you get it fertile. At some point, if you do this on a regular basis, somewhere between 3 to 5 years, your soil will become so fertile that you don't need to add the organic material to your soil anymore. All you have to do is add it to the top of your soil as a mulch, and the organisms will incorporate all those nutrients. That's what Charles Dowding is doing with his no-dig gardening method. He's taking a rich soil and then just adding to it from above. Nouveau Green, thank you so much for that contribution. I appreciate that. Hi, Gardener Scott. My name is Jason. Love your channel. I've learned so much. Thanks for all that you do. I appreciate that, Jason, so much. You and so many others this year have shared that. And for those of you that are relatively new to the channel, I've got hundreds of videos now, but I've said it in videos along the way in some of my live streams that my basic philosophy of gardening is just trying to help one other person become a gardener. And then that person helps someone else become a gardener. And then eventually we have millions of people becoming gardeners. Now, I never anticipated that the Gardener Scott channel would become this successful. And so Jason and all the rest of you that are benefiting from this, it is so heartwarming because that's why I do this. I just wanted to help one person if I could. And instead, we've been building this wonderful worldwide gardening community. So Thank you so much for your support, and I'm so glad that I've been able to help out as much as I can. Okay, Raymond is saying, most coconut coir here still has tannin. I didn't know it, so it poisoned my plants and hindered their growth. I now use export quality washed coir. Yeah, that's a good point. And that gets back to the idea of listening to what somebody tells you to do in your garden, and then you just do it. I have lots of suggestions, and I have lots of ways to do things, but I always encourage you to find out what people are doing locally in your area and talk to those expert gardeners and find out what they do, because much of what I do works for me and it may not work best for you. In areas of the world like Indonesia and South Africa, you're not going to find the peat like we can here in Canada and the United States. And so you have to use different types of ingredients and find out how they use or how they can be used. And coir is one of those kind of things used in the Southern Hemisphere that a lot of us don't have a lot of experience with. So when I talk about adding coir to your bed, yeah, just about all the coir we get here in the U.S. is already buffered. It's already washed. It comes in blocks. But as Raymond points out, that's not the case everywhere. Okay, another question. Is it advisable to fill a low raised bed only with compost after removing the topsoil, which is barren? I do not recommend growing only in compost. You can do it. If it's mostly decomposed, it's filled with nutrients. But there's a lot of things that are missing in compost, a lot of minerals that plants need. And so even a topsoil that is barren has some mineral components that the plants can benefit from. So I always recommend that in a garden bed, even a low bed, that you mix some of your native soil in with the organic material, like the compost. Now you can have a lot of compost and grow primarily in the compost, but I do encourage that as you're putting the bed in place, take some of that soil that is barren now and mix it in. Not only is it going to add structure to your soil, which plants need, it's going to add that mineral component, but it also will become enriched by the compost. And kind of like I was talking about inoculating earlier, if you can build a bed that has that blend of your native soil and compost, you can then use that partially to fill new beds that you use some more soil and some more compost. So that's what I recommend. You can grow in all compost. And a lot of us that are growing in containers, essentially the medium that we're using in containers is soilless. It doesn't have that native soil. That's why we need to replenish it as often as we do, at least yearly, with more organic material. But in the beginning, if you put in some of that soil, you probably won't need to replenish your bed as often. Myrtle Higgins Rooms. Gardner Scott, I live in Jamaica. I am presently having problems with worms on my kalalu and cucumber. Please help. I've been spraying with neem oil, no result. Thanks for your help. And so this, again, is one of those issues. See what you can find in your area as far as gardeners are concerned. Any type of worms, any type of caterpillars, the first thing I do is just pick them off by hand and then try to keep the area as clean as possible. Try to find out exactly what type of worm it is. And when you do that, then you can find out about the life cycle of that worm, what predators that worm has, and what type of corrective action. So like neem oil, for instance, may not be effective for that type of insect. You may need something completely different, but you won't know until you find what that is. So I can't give you a specific treatment because I don't know what kind of insect that is. Try to find out, and then if you can figure out the life cycle, you might be able to learn whether it lays eggs on leaves or it lays eggs in soil. And so this year, your cucumbers, the rest of your plants might be suffering from this pest. But looking to next year, you might be able to do something in your soil. You might know that if you cut the leaves off as soon as you see the caterpillar or worm appear, that you can stop its life cycle and it won't grow anymore. When you can learn those type of things, it can really help in the future. And I also encourage the beneficial insects, the wasps, even the birds, the animals that will eat those things that are pests in your garden. If you can have a healthy environment where all the animals, all the insects are working in your favor, it can really help cut down on some of those problems. So, sorry I can't give you a more specific answer, but those are some of the things to look into to maybe help give you the answer you're looking for. Info Green, thank you so much for that awesome super chat. I appreciate it. As a new gardener, I started under the advice of my father, and we used Miracle Gro Soil. Can I amend the soil with organic material, or should I just start over for next year's garden? I always suggest trying not to start over. Just keep adding to what you have. Now, if you find that your soil is contaminated, and I know a lot of people have a lot of problems with Miracle Gro, how they process some of their products, how they use some of their products, the fact that they're a huge conglomerate, and I understand that. But based on what that initial material is, there's probably nothing wrong with it. And so if your father had advised you to start that way, again, do the analysis. Look at that particular bed. If it's just Miracle Gro soil, yes, you definitely need to add more to it. If you took the Miracle Gro soil, and often on the bags of Miracle Gro, it will say, mix this with an equal amount of your garden soil. So if you didn't do that at that time, then definitely mix it with your garden soil to try to get some of those minerals, some of that soil structure in place. And that's often mixed. You should always, everybody should read the bags of everything they're putting into their garden, because there's often in small print some of those things that we miss, like Scott's and Miracle Gro saying, mix this garden soil with your garden soil. Most gardeners don't do that. They just read the bag that says garden soil. They put it into their beds, and it's not enough to get your plants growing as well as they could. So I wouldn't start over. I would consider adding some native soil, blend it all in. I would also definitely consider adding compost and some of those other organic materials that I just talked about. I'm a relatively lazy gardener. I'm definitely a frugal gardener. And so if I don't have to redo something, I'm not going to redo it. If I just do a little bit of extra effort to make it better, I'll definitely do this. And this may be your opportunity to just add to it, put in some more stuff in those beds. You don't have to start over again. Okay, Amy's saying, Gardener Scott, you helped me not give up. I'm in Denver. You know our weather. It's disappointing to get hail in September. I gave up for several years. You helped me start again. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Amy. Again, that's why I do it. And you can see me today and in the videos to come, I'm not giving up. My garden that I've worked so hard to get to for a whole year. I've been building this garden for a year. I finally have plants. I'm not giving up, even if everything is killed. So let's see what happens. And I didn't see the original comment, but I see Lena's angry face about the bags with fighting gnats. And so I'm guessing you're probably talking about some of the purchased products that come in bags. Again, that's why I like to do everything myself. That's why I like to take my native soil and put in organic material, because so much of what we buy out there will bring in pests of one type or another that we don't want in our garden. I just try to avoid buying bags of anything at the store if I can. Sometimes you have to. Not everybody has the ability like I do to have soil and trees and grass and leaves and all the rest, and you have to buy things. Just be careful when you buy anything from a store, even if it's a big company. You might have to do a little bit of research to find if it's just exactly what you're looking for and suitable for your needs. Bry is asking, Garner Scott, do you use Spinosad or BT and find them effective? I have used BT. BT I've talked about in recent weeks. That's Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a type of bacteria that you can use on plants. It's most effective, depending on the type of BT you're using, for the types of insects that are going to be chewing the plant. And so it can be very effective. There are different types of BT. You can put some BT in water. You can sprinkle some different BTs on plants, but they're very specific as to the type of insect. So if you have a pest that does not eat the plant, then the BT is probably not going to be effective at all. And if you're using a BT that is targeted at caterpillars, well, then it might not be as effective against grasshoppers. So there are many different types of BT out there that are targeted for some of these different types of insect pests. And as long as you get the right BT for the right pest, then yes, they can actually be quite effective. Okay, thank you so much for all those questions coming in. I also wanted to talk a little bit about early harvests, partly because of the cold weather that's going to be hitting me. But it ties in, and I've talked about this before, with other pests, like animal pests. I've told the story over and over again about my apricot tree that I grew years ago. And because of our crazy weather, it's very difficult to get apricots in Colorado Springs. But one year I had half a dozen apricots. They were looking perfect. I was going to come out the next day and harvest, and I came out the next day and the birds had eaten all the apricots because they were going to eat those fruit at their prime. So cold weather is coming. Yes, definitely harvest everything you can before the freeze is going to harm that fruit or those vegetables. But this also holds true for pests in the garden. If you've got squirrels or deer or rabbits or birds that keep eating your crops, that keep eating the fruit that you're going to harvest, well, then learn to harvest early. If you can harvest before the animals want to eat those fruits, then you get to enjoy it rather than the animal pests enjoying it. So it's one of those things, we always want things at their ripest. And not everything you harvest will continue to ripen. Tomatoes will continue to ripen after you pick them off the plant. Most of our garden plants, that's not the case. So you have to accept that you might be harvesting a little underripe, but at least you'll get a harvest that the pests won't. And by comparison, think about the things that you're buying in the grocery stores. Everything, for the most part, that you're buying, even the organic produce, is being harvested underripe so that it can be packaged and trucked and sent to your store and put on the shelves, and then you buy it. So everything from the store is already underripe. If you harvest your garden just one day, maybe 2 days before the absolute best ripe period, it's still more ripe than just about anything you can buy in the store. So this is one way, as we get to the end of our growing seasons here in the Northern Hemisphere, that you can get more of your harvest. Get it a little bit sooner. I had, with my grapes that I grew years ago, the same thing. I harvested after the birds got to the grapes. But I noticed that the grapes were close to being ready to harvest, and I walked away, and then ultimately the birds got them. So that's part of developing your gardening experience and your gardening knowledge, is learning when you can harvest early so that those animal pests that are in your garden don't get to eat literally the fruits of your labor. Okay. Let's see what else we have popping up. Lena is asking, what veggie seeds can I plant now that will germinate in the spring besides garlic? That's a good question. So there aren't a lot of veggie seeds that you can do now. Actually, the video I've got coming out on Friday talks about this subject, but it's talking about growing the flowers and the grasses that you can actually start now that will come up in the spring, some of those are edible. But the thing about the veggies, for the most part, is that they'll germinate when the temperature is right, and then they'll grow. And it's best to put those seeds in close to the time period when the temperatures are going to be right. Now, you could do carrots, you could do beets, you can do turnips. Those are all pretty sturdy seeds. Those are cool season plants, and they'll overwinter fine. It's not a normal practice, but and if you notice a similarity to what I'm talking about, these are biennial plants. And so carrots, for instance, and I have a video about collecting carrot seeds where I talk about this. Carrots will grow the first year, and then they'll overwinter. They'll die back in the winter. They'll grow again in the spring, and then they'll set seed. Well, when they set that seed, if you just let the seed go, it's going to fall to the ground. It'll overwinter. It'll pop up in the spring. So I've had carrots growing all over my garden in years where I wanted to collect the seed. Onions are like this too. If you let onions grow, usually takes 2 seasons to get to the point where they flower and set seed. The seed will fall on the ground and it'll pop up as well. So I've had a lot of biennial plants that just naturally seeded themselves throughout the garden. And those are the ones that you could look to now and sow the seeds in the fall. They'll get through the winter fine. As soon as the soil warms up to the point that the seed can germinate, yeah, they'll start growing in the spring. One of the issues you might have, depending on where you live, like an area like mine, we can still get some really dramatic cold temperatures in spring after the soil has warmed up. And that's why I usually recommend waiting until you have your garden ready to go, the soil's warmed up, the temperatures are going to cooperate, and that's when you set your seed. But go for it. Experiment with some of those biennial plants, and the seed will overwinter fine, and they'll pop up in the spring, and then you can throw protection on them if that cold threatens. But that could be a good way to do it. I prefer to amend my beds in the fall and then let the soil organisms spend fall, winter, and early spring, making the soil nice and rich and healthy. That's why I don't sow my vegetables in the fall. But if you've got good soil that you don't need to amend and be thinking about along those lines, that's great. And then if you do it, report back to me in the spring. Let me know how it turned out. Okay. Mama Cass is saying, I have planted 3 sets of radishes and cannot get them to grow. It could be your soil. It could be the heat. It could be the germination, the soil temperatures. Those would be the things I would say off the top of my head. I would say go ahead and try it again now that temperatures are starting to cool down a little bit. Hot temperatures with those cool plants could be a problem. And so I don't typically grow radishes during the summer because they won't do well. But when things start cooling down, they should. So consider amending your soil before you try radishes again, and try them when the weather is cooler, and hopefully you'll have better results. Okay. Let's see what else we have popping up. Issa is saying, is it worth using mycorrhizal fungi in the garden when transplanting or water in soil near my plants? I don't recommend it. And so mycorrhizal fungi is everywhere. It's a naturally occurring fungi in our soil. And I actually have a video about gardening myths where I talk about this a little bit more. There are a lot of nurseries, a lot of companies out there that will sell you the mycorrhizal fungus or the mycorrhizal spores. You incorporate them in your soil, because if you've ever dug underneath a bark mulch, for instance, or if you have a really moist, rich soil that typically has leaves or wood in the soil, you'll see all these little white filaments in the soil. That's the mycorrhizal activity that's taking place. and they work with the plants. Plants really do better with that mycorrhizal activity in the soil. Therefore, it makes sense that if you buy the mycorrhizal fungi to put into your soil, that you're helping out your plants. And here's where I have a problem with it. Every region of the world is different, and our microorganisms, our local fungi is different than it will be someplace else. So if you buy the mycorrhizal fungi from whatever source, it's going to be different than what is naturally occurring in your soil. So if you just add organic material to your soil, if you add the leaves and the grass, and if you mulch with wood chips, you will get mycorrhizal activity, and it will be your local mycorrhiza. So that's what I recommend. Now, if you have a barren soil, if you're filling a bed for the first time and you think that there's no mycorrhizal spores anywhere in your vicinity, and you talk to your local expert gardeners and they've never seen mycorrhizal action, then I would say yes, go ahead and buy it, inoculate your soil with it. I can't guarantee the result. It's possible that it's not going to survive in your region. It's very possible. I have very severe winters here. The ground freezes to multiple feet. I mean, it's cold. Well, if I were to buy a mycorrhizal fungi from New Jersey, USA, they don't get winters like I do. So I inoculate my soil with that type of fungi. I can almost guarantee you it's going to die in the winter in my garden. That's another reason I don't recommend it. So if you could find a local source, or better yet, if you know somebody who has mycorrhizal activity, all it takes is just a small amount of their soil. Use their soil to inoculate your beds. I think that's a much better, much healthier, much less expensive way to get your soil growing in a nice, healthy manner. Okay, let's see what else. We've got so much help from everybody back and forth today. I so much appreciate it with Jay and Lauraful, and I don't see Heidi on here today, but all of the people that are answering questions, sharing the information. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of that you do, because that's what this is all about, is this nice community where we can share our information. I appreciate it so much. Green Love is asking, is hydrogen peroxide useful to protect plants from disease? It can be. It depends on the disease and it depends on the application, but hydrogen peroxide can be an effective way to do it. And I've used it before on house plants because the application is typically the hardest part about it. So I usually just take a paper towel with hydrogen peroxide and coat my leaves if I suspect I have a problem like that. Yes, but absolutely, it can treat disease. Find out about the disease and the plant to see if it's going to be effective, but it may be a good treatment. Arena Kim, thank you so much for that. That's a nice bouncing thank you back and forth. I appreciate it. And so Laura Full saying that Heidi is here. I just haven't seen her. So she's a regular attendee. That's such a nice, happy thank you. I appreciate that. That's so much. Yeah, Gladys, I appreciate that. 216 people and only 97 likes. If you're benefiting from this live stream, if you're benefiting from the Gardner Scott information, if you're benefiting from something that Heidi or Lauraful or Jay is saying, well, show that appreciation with a thumbs up. It's just one of those nice ways to let us all know that it's appreciated. I'm not saying that you have to do that. By all means, it's voluntary, but sure, if you appreciate it, thank you so much for pointing that out, Gladys. Give me a thumbs up. It's one of those nice things. It helps show YouTube that you all care, and that means something to me as well. I appreciate it. So let's see. There's Heidi. Does covering your raised beds during the winter with straw help keep soil microbes alive? Yeah, absolutely. Now, it depends on the region. It depends on the microbe, and I'll have a video. I think it's programmed for another 2 or 3 weeks out, but I'll have a video where I talk exactly about this, where cover your beds going into winter, because it does a couple things. Depending on how severe your winters are, the microbes may continue to live and may continue to feed and enrich your soil during the winter. And if you have bare soil, the likelihood is lessened. So when you put a mulch on your beds, you're creating a layer of insulation, a blanket that helps keep your soil warmer longer. So it definitely benefits the microbes. A severe area like mine, the microbes might go dormant. They might die depending on what cold they can handle. But once they start popping back up again and repopulating in spring, that organic mulch is there. The winter weather has helped it break down. The melting snow has caused some of that organic material to begin to seep into the soil. Now the microbes have food right away in spring. Bare soil, they're not going to have that food. So they're going to have to rely on whatever's in your soil. But if you can have extra organic material on top of the soil, absolutely, it benefits the microbes. So definitely plan, all of you moving into winter, harsh winters or mild winters, definitely cover all the soil in all the beds in your garden with some type of organic material. Thank you for asking that question. Mama Cass is asking, is there a way we can access these comments after the live stream is over? By the way, I always add my thumbs up after the video has ended. Does that make a difference? Yeah, it does make a difference. So thank you. Anyone that sees one of your comments during the live stream, if they're paying attention to the comments, should see it. When you watch on replay, YouTube will show the comments. So you should see the comments synchronized with the replay. Now, it does take some time. It might take, I've noticed sometimes it can be as long as a couple days. Usually it's only an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. But it does take some time for YouTube to synchronize everything. But you should see on replay that the comments are there. I've only had one video, and I can't explain why, or one live stream, I should say. I've only had one live stream where the comments weren't there, and I have no explanation for it. But if you watch this in replay, then you can get to comments. And that's what my daughter does every week. She types up all of your comments. She types up all of your questions. And then I have basically the documentation of what happened in the live stream, so that as I bring up subjects, so like for instance, this week I brought up organic materials as a subject I wanted to talk about. Well, the reason I talked about that is because I saw previous comments that were asking for that. And the reason I saw those previous comments is because I watched my live stream replay. I always do it. And my daughter had typed up all those questions. So you can do the same thing. Just watch the replay a couple of hours after we're done here, and you'll be able to see all the comments as well. And if you're watching in replay, you can go ahead and put comments down below, and I'll answer the questions just like a normal video. If you have a question in the comments, I'll be able to respond to that as well. So I hope that helps. Hope that answered your question. So I wanted to go ahead. Oh, Sir William of Pennylot, keep it up. Thank you so much for that sticker. I appreciate that contribution. That gives me a smile. Will help me get through my day, because I have a busy day harvesting, covering plants, all those other things planned. So I will definitely keep it up. Thank you so much for that. And as we approach this disastrous event for those of us in the central United States, I wanted to share this little bit of philosophy wisdom with you, and I think you may have already started picking up on some of it as you see the comments from other people who are also encountering it, particularly the ones in Utah and Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, the ones that are going to be suffering over the next 24 hours. And the idea is that you're not alone. Whatever your gardening issue is, there is somebody else out there that has the same issue. And they've come through it fine. And they persevere and they keep on going. So all of us on the stream today that are about to lose some of our plants, you're not alone. We're all going through this at the same time. If you're in another part of your world and insects are eating your plants, well, you're not alone. There are other peoples that are probably right next door to you or one neighborhood over that are having those same issues. So especially for new gardeners, if this is your first year, this can be a problem. You've been watching videos, you've been learning, you've been trying, you have the seeds, you have the plants, and then something goes wrong and you are convinced that you did something wrong. And that can be very discouraging. That may be the case, but it might be more likely that a pest moved in, the weather changed, there was something you just didn't know about yet that maybe you should have done, you just didn't know that you needed to do it. We've all been through that. All of us that are now considered experienced gardeners, at some time, we were beginner gardeners too. And we had these same issues. So I always like to share stories of my gardener friends, the clubs I belong to. I think that's a great way to learn and realize that others are going through the same thing you're going through. So if you can join a garden club, if you can find a Facebook group, if you can talk to your neighbors, other gardeners out there, now you can share your stories. And when you say you've got a particular problem, well, someone else in that group will say, I've got that problem too. Here's how I dealt with it. And then you can get to the point where you're the expert and you're in a group and some new beginning gardener says, I've got this problem. And you say, oh yeah, I've had that problem too. Here's what I did to correct it. So learn from other people because other people have the same issues. It doesn't matter that a person that has insects eating their plants is living in Indonesia or Japan or South Africa or Australia or Norway or Sweden or France or Canada or the US. Those are all countries that I have viewers on the Gardener Scott channel. We all have issues with insects eating our plants. That's why we can share our information. That's why we can talk to each other, because we aren't alone. This is a global community of gardeners. So that's the philosophy point I wanted to share with you today. I just wanted to say we're all going to get through this, whatever the problem. For me and those in my region, it's 3 days of severe cold. For you, it might be the fact that you're experiencing record heat waves, unlike anything that's ever been seen before. Others are experiencing the same thing. You may be having rain or snow or wind or something that's devastating your garden. We've had hurricanes and typhoons around the world that have destroyed gardens this year. There are others that are suffering the same fate. So try not to get discouraged. Try not to get depressed. Try to look at this as this means that you are part of a community and lots of other people are going through the same thing. If they're going to push forward, if they're going to persevere, well, then by all means, that should give you all the ammunition you need to give yourself that extra boost so that you persevere and that you push forward. So there's some gardening words of wisdom, my philosophy for the week that I hope you realize. And I've had to rely on it too. As I walked through my garden over the last couple of days, realizing what I was going to lose, it's disheartening. It is difficult, even for me, to look forward to the disaster that's about to hit. But I stopped and thought, there are people in Denver, in Fountain, in Woodland Park. I have regular viewers that live within 30 minutes of me. They're going to be going through the exact same thing. And they're having the exact same concern. So, yeah, I can be concerned. I can be sad. But I'm still going to push through, work forward, and make a go of it. And then just learn from it, figure out what I'm going to do next time. I want to thank you, Mama Cass, for that thumbs up super sticker contribution. I appreciate all of the contributions from all of you, even if it's just a comment, even if it's just a thumbs up, like, even if it's a super chat or a super sticker, whatever. I appreciate all the contributions. I appreciate all of you being here, and I appreciate you sharing with each other. This is what makes this such a wonderful channel, such a wonderful gardening community, and I'm so glad that I can be part of it, and I'm so glad all of you can be part of it as well. Thank you to everybody out there. So many of you commented on my video last night. In fact, on Mondays, I'll get up, I'll answer the comments from overnight, and I normally answer a few hundred comments a day. And then I'm done answering the comments, and I'll start focusing on things like what I'm going to do for my gardening day. In this case, getting ready for the live stream. I couldn't answer all of the comments. There were so many comments from that video last night. People expressing their concern, saying that they are wishing me the best. Thank you so much for that. So when I'm done right now, I'm going to go back and try to get to some of those comments that I honestly didn't have time to get to because there were just so many of them. So all of you, thank you so much for caring so much, not just about me, but about each other. That's what makes this such a wonderful gardening community. And we've come to the end of our time. I thank you, all of you who have been so active in the participation today. We're well over 200 people watching right now, and there will be thousands more in the replay. So thank you to everybody that helps make this so wonderful every week. And I'll see you next Monday, same time, same place, for another week, and I'll share with you just what kind of impact this storm had, and I'll be looking for your comments, sharing with me what impacts the storm had for you as well. Thank you so much. Teresa, thanks for that thumbs up to end the week. I appreciate that contribution. I hope you all have a wonderful week in your garden. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.